Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Bhalabha Giribharadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Ashtotara Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees, oh, glories to the assembled devotees, oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Shishiguru and Shiguranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, the Summon Bonum, Chapter 54, Krishna marries Rukmini Text number 44. Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nava Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nabha Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nabha. Please chant. Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nabha Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nabha Eka eva paro hyatma sarveshan apidehinam naneva grihyate mudhair yatha yotir yatha nabha Ekaha one eva only paraha the supreme he indeed Atma soul sarvesham among all api and dehinam embodied beings nana many eva as if grihyate is perceived mudhai by those who are bewildered yatha as yotihi a celestial body yatha as nabha the sky. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Those who are bewildered perceive the one Supreme Soul who resides in all embodied beings as many, just as one may perceive the light in the sky or the sky itself as many. Purport. The last line of this text, yatha, yotir yatha nabha, introduces two analogies in which we perceive one thing to be many. Yotihi indicates the light of heavenly bodies such as the moon, such as the sun or moon. Although there is only one moon, we may see the moon reflected in pools, rivers, lakes, and buckets of water. Then it will appear as if there were many moons, although there is only one. Similarly, we perceive a divine presence in each living being because of the Supreme Lord is present everywhere, although He is one. The second analogy is given here, Yatha Navaha, as is that of the sky. If we have a row of sealed clay pots in a room, the sky or air in each pot, the sky or air is in each pot, although the sky itself is one. The Srimad Bhagavatam 1:2-32 give a similar analogy concerning fire and wood. Yatha hi abahito bhanir darashwaika swajonishu naneva bhatti vishwatma bhuteshu cha tathapumam. Quote, the Lord, as a super soul, pervades all things, just as fire permeates wood, and so He appears to be of many varieties, though He is the absolute one without a second. End of quote. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Ummilitangena Tasmai Sri Gurube Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Romapa Swami Iti Namine. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, Lord Balaram, he is giving here a very important understanding, and in one sense it's an observation of the way a conditioned soul perceives reality. In the conditioned state, or in the bodily conception of life, or one is overwhelmed by this materialistic concept of life. The perception of realities is one sees the overwhelming amount of diversity that exists in the world. So one sees so many different things, different manifestations of energies, different manifestations of living entities, different manifestations of cultures, of races, of beliefs, natures, all these different things is the reality of the world. A similar type of observation is given by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, in which he, in the 18th chapter, he makes this several verses making a breakdown of how reality is perceived in the three different modes of nature. And he expresses that in the mode of passion, the particular reality that one observes is basically focused on these differences, on this diversity. He says, I read it. Can you close that door, Vivo? Ladies are talking there. Thank you. He said, that knowledge by which one sees that every different body, that in every different body there's a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. So in other words, one is focused on the differences. This is reality. It's what we immediately experience, that there is a different there's a different reality to the one that I'm experiencing. And in general, that type of passionate vision, or vision that is influenced by the mode of passion, leads to conflicts. Differences leads to conflict. Basically, you go into a logger jam. How do you say that expression? Logger jam or logger, you go head to head with something, with a different reality. Huh? Loggerhead, yes. With a different reality. So, Lord Balaram is saying to Rukmini that those who are bewildered, they perceive this all-pervading reality, which is the spiritual reality, that is unchangeable, that is absolute, that is one. They perceive it in many, in diversity. And is described as being, is the reality of a bewildered soul, of a bewildered entity, living entity. So it leads to all kinds of difficulties. It leads, actually, that type of understanding leads to going down and down and down into the entanglement of material consciousness. So therefore, he's encouraging Rukmini, you can't perceive things like this. You have to be able to understand that the actual way of seeing reality. Well, let me backtrack, to keep, going to this later. So there's this bewildering perception of reality in which we see differences. We are focused on differences. And out of many, many, many conflicts that we experience while being focusing on differences, then we start to think, well, there have to be an alternative. And the alternative that we have to see oneness. We have to move into, the common ground. It's common sense. And that's what we, as devotees, we experience that constantly. What is our common ground? Yes, even, civilized people, they try to find this common ground. They try to find these places of unity. And they find, places of unity in humanity. And, or sometimes we trying to find places of unity in common beliefs and these type of things. So then we can move to oneness, and then we can take it further, into oneness as going more into the essential part, which is spiritual. But when you go either difference or oneness on itself is problematic too. Because one is a materialistic view, and the other one on itself can lead to impersonalism or Mayavadi philosophy. So on oneness in itself, trying to basically out of managing the amount of conflicts that this view of difference brings, in order to manage that and trying to, okay, there should not be any differences. We have to, establish oneness. Without becoming blinded, or trying to, not blinded, but avoiding the reality that there's differences. So I'm trying to impose some oneness. And that also doesn't work. So Lord Chaitanya gives us the actual understanding of the absolute truth, which is simultaneously one and difference, or unity in diversity. Like that, or diversity in unity. I can't remember how it goes. I think it's diversity in unity. So these two things have to be simultaneously there. We have to understand it like that. When we do it separated, it doesn't work. So we know that when we have, as expressed in the Bhagavad Gita, when we're influenced by the moral passion, then we tend to be hovering or seeing reality mostly influenced by our perception of differences. We are not able, as long as you remain under the moral passion, it's very difficult to see the spiritual essence of everything. It's very difficult. Therefore, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is trying to, is recommending that we elevate ourselves to the moral goodness. And in the moral goodness, then it becomes the springboard for actually performing devotional service. So in the moral goodness, then we can actually understand that, yes, there is this unifying, and it's wonderful because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna uses the word sarvabhutanam when he expresses the one on the moral goodness. The one in the moral goodness, he says like this: that knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the moral goodness. So in the moral goodness, then we can see that the spiritual essence that is within all living beings. And he uses the word sarvabhutanam, all living beings, that is not just humans, but actually all living entities, all species of life, which is a much more superior conception or alternative to the amount of conflicts that are there when you're focusing on differences, because human society throughout history have tried to find alternative to that. And then you come with different type of isms, either philosophical, religious, or political, to try to solve these problems of differences. So in a philosophical realm, there is this movement that it was called humanistic secular, secular human, or humanistic secularity, or something like that. I can't remember how it goes. But basically what it says is, in response of the amount of conflict that were there in the religious world between religious differences, then it come out with taking the moral principles of religion, but taking God out of the picture. So you go with the morality and the principles of ethical principles and moral principles of religion in human society, but just take God away. So then that makes a more unifying sort of almost like a universal type of philosophy or religious field, or a unifying, concept of philosophy, but without God. Because this concept of having this God and that's the conflicting part. The conception of God of different religions, the exclusivity that different religions have. So then you make this unifying thing. And in the political arena, you have, communism that goes away with different classes of people, and then claim that everybody should be, of one class. So all these things have found, also failures to bring unity, because you can get away with differences. But the Bhagavad Gita gives us this alternative that although we can see we can accept that there is differences, there is different classes of people, there is different varieties of life, we can also see the unifying essence of a spirit. So that is the platform of goodness. But also the Bhagavad Gita tells us that there is a higher. In other words, the platform of goodness, like as I was just pointing out, is a springboard. And from that springboard, devotional service begins. Krishna explains that later in this 18th chapter, when he says that when one comes to that spiritual conception that is called the Brahma Bhuta stage. And in the Brahma Bhuta stage, you're able to see all living entities equal from the spiritual perspective. So Brahma Bhuta Prasagnam, you experience the happiness also of this spiritual, the happiness of the spirit. And you start to experience that eternal happiness, the bliss. And na sochati na kanchati sarva Brahma Bhuta Prasanna na sochati na kanchati. I forgot, but that you see all all living entities as spirit souls. Sarva Bhuteshu something. Sama Dharma, Sama what? Yeah. Okay, however it goes. That you perceive all living entities as spirit souls, and from there, Mad Bhaktin Labate Param. Then devotional service begins. So what is this? Then in devotional service, what is the difference? In devotional service, the difference is that now, from that perspective, you're able to receive now transcendental knowledge. You go from knowledge in the mode of goodness to transcendental knowledge. And in transcendental knowledge, what is the differences? What is the difference in transcendental knowledge? Krishna says that in the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, when he explains to Arjuna about transcendental knowledge. And when he says in text 34, he expresses that one should search for a spiritual master who is a seer of who have darshan or have seer of the truth, and learn from the spiritual master the principles of Krishna consciousness. And then in 35 he says, what is that we learn? So let me read that. He says that having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, so this transcendental knowledge, you will never fall again into such illusion. By this knowledge, you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, they are mine, Krishna says. So the understanding, the transcendental understanding of the spiritual reality is that we are Krishna's energy. So now, the principle of unity and diversity not only applies to this world, but also applies to the world of transcendence. In the material realm, the principle of unity and diversity is that we see that diversity is real. It's a real thing. Because there's different modes, all these different manifestations of matter. But we also see that there's this all-pervading spiritual energy that is present also, the spiritual reality that unifies all living entities in this world. We all have that spiritual nature. When you go into the world of transcendence, then we see the unity and diversity to principle in place. The unity is that the source of everything, that's when you are the energy of Krishna, we're unified as one. So you can separate the energy and the energetic. And therefore, we do share the qualities of Krishna, the spiritual qualities. We share that. So, but at the same time, there's a very clear difference between the energy and the energetic. So the energetic is the source, and the energy is depending on the energetic for its existence. So there is a simultaneous difference. So when we have transcendental knowledge, we understand that. We understand that Krishna is the source, we are his energy, and the comparisons is there like the particles of the sunlight. The sunlight is the energy of the sun. And within that sunlight, that spiritual energy, there are particles of light. Each particle of light has the qualities of the sun in a very, very, very atomic, in an atomic size. So the sun is described as Vibhu, and the Atma is described as Anu, like atomic, a particle. So we come to understand that we are a particle of that great source of energy. And Krishna says, in other words, that each living entity is mine. So that's transcendental. So that have implications too, that if we are related to Krishna in such a way, we're depending on Krishna. Krishna is our source. and we have that relationship of dependence, then naturally our function is to serve the interests and everything that is there of Krishna. The comparison of, a little screw of this great machine. You have a function to serve the overall function of the machine. So we have a little function that is that the purpose of that existence of that little screw is to serve the big purpose or the overall purpose of the machine. So Lord Balaram is pointing out that to Rukmini, that he speaks about first, as he's speaking to her, is just making the point of this whole spiritual conception, or to understand the difference between the bodily conception of life and the spiritual conception of life. So he's been speaking about being bewildered by the material conception of life, and start to see relationships, to see the world according to that. So this comes from, Rukmini saying, well, I'm just attached to my brother. And then Lord Balaram is responding to that. That this type of seeing all the things and making choices under the bodily conception of life is not going to give you the proper result, but actually will make you act or have the resolve of someone who is bewildered, confused, or have the whole wrong conception. So you're going to have, that's going to lead to suffering. So Lord Balaram is saying that the bodily conception will lead to so much suffering. So you have to rise over that bodily conception into a spiritual conception. That spiritual conception is part of the understandings that are there in the mode of goodness. But beyond that is, the transcendental understanding. But we have to get to the mode of goodness. That was so important for us to cultivate that. The fact is that every time we experience conflict, either individually or communally, it means that the mode of passion is being acting, passion and ignorance. We're not acting in the mode of goodness. And it is part of the reality because, we are, when you come to the material world, especially in this particular universal time, the age of Kali, is very much influenced by passion and ignorance. So we already come into this world with a great disadvantage. So the influence of passion and ignorance is very prominent. So naturally, as we come into devotional service and in the community of devotees, we have to go through the whole process of becoming free from that influence. So it is important to be very introspective and observant and being able to monitor oneself and understand that every time I'm experiencing all these negative sort of emotions that arises from, that are conflicting and bewildering, perplexing, then we can understand that we've been influenced by that. And again, what is the symptom of being influenced by the mode of passion? Is that we focus on our differences. We focus on our differences. And therefore, that immediately is a red flag, or is a sign, like beware. Something is a red flash is coming, boom, 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 telling us, pay attention, beware. And if we're introspective, we can see, oh, okay, I have some conflict. Is because there's some, I'm not trying, I'm being influenced by moral passion, by false ego, and by these type of conceptions. So by taking this position of being very introspective and monitoring these type of things, then I can try to cultivate these more expansive conception, the Krishna conscious conception of understanding, yes, well, we have to strive for unity in diversity. Prabhupada says that. There's so many amazing quotes. I'm just going to read a few because I'm taking a course just yesterday, we got this class on unity and diversity, which was very, very timely. And here's some quotes of Srila Prabhupada on these things. So Prabhupada says, this is from a purport in Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 7, text number 54. Every one of us is an expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This accounts for unity in diversity. So, similarly, what we've been discussing, and then he says, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirms the conclusion of Srimad Bhagavatam on the strength of his philosophy of Achintya Veda Aveda Tattva. That philosophy holds that the Supreme Lord is simultaneously one and different from his creation. That is to say, there is unity in diversity. In a letter to Kirtanananda, October 1973, material nature means dissension and disagreement, especially in this Kali Yuga. But for this Krishna conscious movement, its success will depend on agreement, even though there are varieties of engagements. If we keep Krishna in the center, then there will be agreement in varieties. This is called unity in diversity. But if we fight on account of diversity, then it is simply the material platform. Please try to maintain the philosophy of unity in diversity. That will make our movement successful. So, Mayavadi philosophers, they take one side only. That is, that it is one. They do not understand what is the difference. What is the different taste varieties? They cannot understand the varieties. Unity in diversity. They cannot understand. In the vase, there is a variety of flowers. And that variety helps us better appreciate the idea of flowers. That is called unity in diversity. Our students come from different backgrounds, but because they are all in Krishna consciousness, they are unified. So, this is something that also Prabhupada writes. It's very important. It's an important principle that he says that the success of this movement is depending on understanding this unity and diversity. The success not only for the individual devotees, but for the whole community of devotees. To be able to understand that, to be able to come to expand your capacity to bypass without being blinded about it of our differences. In other words, we have to accept and embrace our differences. We have to come to accept that and be respectful and be accepting that there is the differences are there. And be unified by our spiritual purposes, which is to serve Guru and Krishna. This is what Prabhupada says in a very important letter. This is to Karandar. It's a very, very famous letter. He said, movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there is bureaucracy, the whole things will be spoiled. There must be always individual striving and work and responsibility, competitive spirit, not that all should dominate and distribute benefit to others, and they do nothing but beg from you, and you provide. Each center remains, as when Prabhupada was discussing about, each center remains independent. So he wanted, this sort of simultaneously being independent, but at the same time be very much following and connected to the ISKCON structure. As a GBC, he established a GBC, the whole managing structure of the movement. So it's a very very fine balance between these two things. And that is Krishna, that's the culture, that's Krishna consciousness. From the level of the institution to the level of the individuals, we have to find that balance. And that's what we're striving for. We're striving for being able to be very comfortably situated and acting on that fine balance of unity and diversity. And so that's why we have to be constantly monitoring ourselves. So again, in the community of devotees, we put ourselves in the pot, and at the time, you've been boiled, basically. So we've been, it's like someone is making burfi out of ourselves. Our spiritual master are making burfi. So to make burfi, you have to put the milk on the pot on the fire, high fire, and keep churning that. So as we churn, we become thicker and thicker and thicker into, this amazing creation, brown burfi. So, but, we have to boil. We have to be burned. It's like, you're being on fire. So the process of purification is It's not comfortable, but it's necessary. And we know what we signed for. We signed for to be purified. We signed for to be able to overcome this condition, this passionate and ignorant condition of life, and being able to rise to transcendence. So we have to be very introspective in this process, understanding, and trying to find this balance. And in one sense, Lord Balaram is also point out about that the actual position of knowledge, of an elevated, he's telling Rukmini that, you're an elevated soul. So you have to have this down, this balance between matter and spirit. And don't be bewildered by, sort of seen by a mistaken conception like that. See if I have something else to share with you. I'm going to stop here and see if you have any comments or questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Very, very profound principle. Unity in diversity. You mentioned that we have our differences, but we have to find a common ground. If we see conflicts, that's a red flag. Beware. You are in a space of passion and ignorance. I remember reading that every one of us have little different relationship with God. How I understand Krishna, somebody may not understand Krishna that way. Somebody have a different relationship with Krishna. Prabhupada was once giving a class, and Prabhupada said that each and every one of you who are sitting in the class have a different concept of happiness. And I remembered these things as you were giving the class, and I thought I would make a comment on that.
Yeah. It's there's something yesterday in the class. The one who was giving the class is Brajavihari Prabhu, who specializes service in ISKCON is conflict resolution. Actually, he works for the U.S. government for doing that, in Washington, D.C. And he brought out this thing called naive realism. Naive realism. And that gives us an insight of the type of, what are the causes of these conflicts, of being able to see or to share or to have a common reality with other people. In general, we come to understand that when we come together as devotees in the beginning, we think, oh, this is very wonderful. We are all, the community of devotees, and we all worshiping Krishna and learning from Srila Prabhupada, and it's amazing. And we feel, all this, we feel the unity part, and it's just incredibly wonderful. But then when we start to associate with each other, then we start to see the differences. And the difference comes, like, as you just mentioned, that I am, there is the instruction from from Srila Prabhupada and from Krishna, and that instruction I take and I process, and then it comes as my expression, my personal expression of devotion. That same instructions you read, you process through, the particular body, the particular mind, the particular nature that you have, the background, and that comes out as your expression of devotion. The same instruction is there, but because we may have quite different backgrounds, the expression of devotion is going to be diverse too. And sometimes, one is white, one is black. It's completely opposite. Actually, it's a very nice also quote that he was saying. This is from William Blake on the vision of Christ. This is a quote. "That thou dost see is my vision's greatest enemy. Thine love the same world that mine hates. Thy heaven doors are my hell gates. Both read the Bible day and night, but thou readst black where I read white." So is highlighting this difference. We're reading the same, spiritual instruction, but I'm reading this way, you're reading it that way. So then when we come together, then I'm trying to understand, okay, why you're not able to see like I see. And that's a conflict that we have. So that's described as naive realism. And this is the quote from that he gave. That the failure of a given individual or group to share my views arises from one of three possible sources. So this is, this introspection, not necessarily a Krishna conscious, but this is just regular thinking people in the world trying to deal with these conflicts of sharing ideas or differences. So three possible sources. One, the individual or group in question may have been exposed to a different sample of information that I was. Possibility. So in which case, provided that the other party is reasonable and open-minded, the sharing or pooling of information should lead us to reach an agreement. So, civilize. People can, the possibility that we don't share the same views because we got a different source of information. The second one, the individual or group in question may be lazy, irrational, or otherwise unable or unwilling to proceed in a normative fashion from objective evidence to reasonable conclusions. So it's just you're dealing with crazy. It's just people that are irrational. So that's not going to work. And the third one is that individual or group in question may be biased, either in interpreting the evidence or in proceeding from evidence to conclusion, by ideology, self-interest, or some distorting personal influence. So, when we monitor in these things, I have to see if, make those questions of myself. Okay, so am I being biased in the way I see things, or concluding things? Or I may be irrational. Or maybe I'm just, looking for this, having these different sources of information. Sometimes we see that even in Vaishnava philosophy, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, we see some institutional groups that are focusing on a particular aspect. Some are focusing on these things that have to do with a spontaneous type of worship, this Raganuga Bhakti. And that's something that they've made quite a focus. And then you may be reading, something you make a search in the internet and comes from that perspective, and that source of information may lead to a whole bunch of things, So when you are presenting your views, it may be colored by that. And if I am just exclusively reading Srila Prabhupada's books, then I maybe have another type of, so that type of thing. So, we have to be, in other words, it's quite something that is a big thing in the reality of most of us of growing in Krishna consciousness, and not only individually and as a community. And we see that, manifest in so many ways. And we have to start at home. We have to start with ourselves, and then being able to in one sense, be an example of this type of self-awareness of our different biases or irrational things or just misconceptions or different conceptions. We have to open. We have to be able to embrace difference. We have to be able to negotiate with differences. And therefore, manifest what we're supposed to be individually and as a community. The fact that our community is not yet being representative of the diversity that is there in the place in which we are preaching. We're preaching here in Chicago, but our community doesn't represent the diversity of Chicago. So that means that we have work to do. Any other question? Yes, Anaya.
So we're qualitatively one with Krishna. So does that also mean like you said, that it means that, Krishna's the source and we're a part. So does the qualitatively thing mean, how Krishna has certain characteristics? We have those, but in different quantities. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay.
But it's also a little more to it. It's not absolutely truth, because in the Nectar of Devotion, when you read that Krishna has 64 qualities, and Lord Vishnu or the other expansions of Krishna have 60 of those qualities. So Krishna has 4 that are exclusively his, and then all the different expansions of Krishna, Vishnu Tattvas, have 60. And then Lord Shiva exclusively have 55 of those 64. And the living entities have 50. So we have, we share a high percentage of Krishna's qualities as living entities. But the difference is, in quantity, as you say. So we're Anu, so the quantities will be atomic. So they're limited. Krishna is unlimited of those qualities. Any other question? Krishna Archam?
It seems sort of a very idealistic concept in one sense, that there's going to be a unified group of persons holding the same source of information, let's say information coming from Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, and hence be able to proceed being carefully introspective and take it that, we're all working with the same sources of information, and also that there's the introspection going on. But clearly it's quite a complex thing when one thinks that persons are bringing different specialized education or different cultural influences, depending upon which part of the world the person is coming from. And that somehow has to meld together the different cultures, the different specialized education, with that source of information and the focus being identical. So one can see it's still somewhat complex. I mean, naturally one understands that the spiritual principle of having in the understanding of that one is a spirit soul, and so that's where the focus needs to lie, is the key factor in the whole picture. But one can see that the ongoing process of melding of cultural differences or melding of specialized educational outlooks is a lot of fine work to be done.
Yeah, it's all about breaking down the collapse of the false ego. That's what it boils down at the end for each one of us. Is that the whole process of Krishna consciousness is to loosen that grip until we're free. And the part that makes it very difficult to be able to have that balance is our false ego. And it becomes easier as you go with the work, because it requires work. It's like, any type of relationship, you see that. It's just a principle in the world, how to work. You have to be able to expand yourself out of your self-centered stuff, which is the false ego. And as you expanding, you include other people, then you have to be able to negotiate and to be able to give and take. And that's what makes a successful relationship in one sense. So, like in marriage, you see that. I mean, it's a lot of work to go through being able to have a sustained, progressive, nourishing relationship. It takes work. And that's with everything. Also in the relationship with devotees, in relationship with Krishna, the spiritual master, it takes that type of commitment and being able to work and negotiate. And the negotiation comes to not only understand the other party, but to understand yourself and to be able to establish, that space, the common ground. So it is, yes, it's complex, but the complexity is because of that. It's because we're coming from this position of false ego that is usually pretty much self-centered. How I see things. Anyway, thank you very much. Garantarashimam